to announce, I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker of day 3, Laura Katherin Vargas Vega, who is a pre-service teacher from Universidad Distrital Francisco José de Caldas in Bogotá, Colombia. She is engaged in both research and practice in secondary schools. Her current inquiry includes exploration of poetry and short stories as tools to generate meaningful learning. During Laura's talk, we recommend watching on speaker view, and if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box. Take away, please share your screen, Laura.
Okay. Now?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a little girl that loved poems. That girl was me. And time passed, and through stories, I get inspired to be a teacher. And in that moment, I decided to inquiry as part of my teaching work or process. So I chose poetry as part of my inquiry because I enjoy it a lot and it's one of my favorite activities. But also because I wanted to inquire what will happen if my students started to write poems inside the classroom. And also I wanted a different kind of activity. Since as a high school student, I remember having out of context activities and not very creative ones. So I was working in a peculiar school. This school had all of the lower secondary students in just one classroom. It means that as a teacher, I had to teach them all at the same time. I had 6th, 7th, and 8th graders just in one classroom, and I had to taught them all of their different topics. So how can you integrate all of the topics without losing time or be conscious about each student's process? For me, the answer was poetry, because they were working at their pace and they could control their own projects. As I was telling you, I worked with teenagers between 12 and 17 years old. That is a very huge population because, as I told you before, they were all part of a single classroom. It is called a unitary school. Most of them are common in rural areas, and it was here in Bogotá. That is not very rural, but anyways, it was a unitary school. So I also wanted my participants or my teenagers to learn in a significant way. But what does it mean to learn significant? Now, my definition, or the definition that I found from Oswald, is that when we learn significant, what we do is to connect the things that we already know with the new learning or with the new input. And we also can relate many of our experiences and our background, our environment with topics that we need to review. And that's what I wanted to make with EFL. So that's why I proposed an intervention. And my initial idea was to make it on site. But later on, we had this problematic with the COVID problem pandemic situation. So I had to change it to online. But for me, it meant a lot of changes, because my initial idea was for us to share all together and to sit and to interact. So I had to figure out how to make it work online. And it was two parts. In the first part, I was making a sensibilization in which they could get to know poetry, the different types of poems that there are in literature. So I used cinema forums. I used movies for them to understand and to be engaged with poems. I used freedom writers, and I used the Dead Poets Society. And we debated. This was still in the classroom. And we created debates. I had to write this in Spanish because at that time they were not very proficient in English. So that's why that's why the first ticket, I created tickets for the cinema forums, and that's why the first ticket is in Spanish. Okay, and then when we moved to online learning, I started to use Google Classroom, and I posted weekly poems from different authors, Edgar Allan Poe, Carol Lewis, and so many authors, so many different authors, for them to read and understand, and based on that, create their own version. But they were free to use whatever topic they were interested on. So I can tell you that we had so many different topics. We had feelings, love, anger, friendship. We had animals. We had experiences such as childhood, death, and it was interesting for me to understand what their background was. But you might be wondering, how can I evaluate poems if they are if I mean, you cannot control someone's ideas. And poems for me are feelings and ideas. So how could I evaluate this? What I made was to create an assessment form in which I summed up their usage of imagination and confidence meanwhile writing. Also, if they were originary and if they were creating poetical ideas or different figures like metaphors, symbols, or different things that made me realize that they were really working on it. There was not just like a specific task. I mean, they could write about whatever they wanted, but they had to show progress. And I found out in the findings, first, that poetry offers a secure environment for them, because in one of the artifacts that I picked, student A evidenced that he was suffering from bullying inside the school. And we as teachers didn't know because he was not able to express that in words, but he could do it in writing. So sometimes we dismiss some of our students' problems, and it is important not to do it. Here, 2020, for example, illustrates that in writing, children can express some attitudes that they have towards bullying. And that's what he did. In the second place, I found out that poems can generate cathartic processes. So when students are having difficult situations, poems can become a way to express and generate the emotive functions of language that they really need. This, of course, matches with Ramager 2013, when he suggests that writing is a description of the poet's emotional and intellectual experiences. So in this case, I treat my students as future poets. And this was a kind of club. So they were not just obligated to participate, but most of them did. I also find out that sometimes teenagers are very shy. So they don't want the others to know what they're thinking about. And that's why I decided to make the sensibilization. because at the beginning, some of them were, and I'm going to quote the words in Spanish. Profe, no sé escribir en inglés, quedó mal. It means I don't know how to write in English. I didn't do it well. So I had to generate in them that confidence, so they could be successful in what they were doing. And that is because I consider that as teachers, we uphold, we support, and we teach. We are not there only for giving our students some information, but we are there for supporting, for uphold, and in that way, say 2016 affirms that motivating content is necessarily because it helps students to achieve better grades, and in general, it generates higher quality education as we are taking care of each student's process. On the other hand, I found out that prompts are key at this level because I told you they are beginners in English. So I discovered that if I wanted them to write poems, I needed to show them some examples so they could create their own versions of them. Otherwise, it would be very difficult and they would be even disappointed because it was so hard for them. So they had to scaffold and go step by step. First, most of them, at first, most of them did not know many strategies to write in English. I asked them, how many strategies do you know to write in a foreign language? And they just said that they use Google Translator, but so far, no, they didn't use anything else. In that way, some authors like Ramadan 2018 explained the significance of using the mock technique, that is the prompts, because it makes pupils engaged in writing. So when you show them an example of what they have to do, they can learn and improve their writing skills. I also realized that I could use literary airs for teaching EFL. Sometimes we dismiss literary arts and arts in general for teaching, and it is helpful because they make that children get engaged with the topics, and it provides a better understanding for them of the different topics. And as they are using their imagination, they can activate their cognitions. And on the other hand, I also discovered that learners' proficiency improves when they like what they are doing. So at first, I made a proficiency test. Most of them scored E1 level. We starting to make the intervention. It was 11 weeks, working so hard. And after that, some of them increased their level a lot. And it was a kind of steps, no? So at first, they were just using the prompts all of the time and changing just some of the words. And then they were like having more success, and they were getting better in which they were doing. So as it was a kind of steps. It was a constructive process. It means that they had to activate their connection to be creative, to imagine, to wonder about the topics, and they also could relate their families, their background inside this process. It made that they could integrate what they learned about poetry in academic writing. So what you learned about grammar and vocabulary, writing poetry, they could integrate it in academic works, so, such as essays and papers. And that's all. Do you have any questions? Hi. Well, I think that there are no questions so far. So
Thank you, Laura, this presentation for this great presentation. So this was about the use of poetry as a tool to engage students, secondary students, right? So this
lower
shows a little
secondary.
how this help these students to engage with the language as a way of expression, right?
Yeah, yeah, it engages them because they can have, or they discovered a different way to use English, because they were used to use English just to fill in the gaps their students' books, and they were not really, they had nothing to do with their context. So when they started to make poetry, they discovered that they could relate their work with their lives, and that motivates them. Okay, I have
Okay,
questions.
there are some
Yeah.
questions now.
Yeah. So number one, how much time do you need to train the students to write a poem? Well, I think it depends, because it was a process of maybe 2 months. I think it was not enough to make them like professional writers, but by using prompts, as I told you, they could have some basic elements to write poems. How much time of your teaching have you dedicated to developing poetry writing? Was it full time? Yeah. Before this implementation, I was also working on some things related to poetry writing, and yeah, they used to have classes with me all day long. So yeah, we had a lot of time to dedicate to poetry writing, and the intervention itself was 11 weeks. Katherin Walker. Okay. Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, try to use it in your classes and let me know how it goes. After writing their poems, did they display their poems in front of audience? Well, they were not obligated to do it. However, we had some video conference, and if they wanted, they could share their poems with other people if they wanted, but they were not obligated to do it as a matter of their self-confidence, right? So it was not an obligation to share. And finally, yeah, in this case, I use haiku poetry. I also use calligrams, and I also used some quatrains for them to learn, because I consider that those are like the easiest ways of poems. So and also the shorter for them. So yeah, I used haikus, calligrams, quatrains. Yeah. Is it possible to grade poetry? I want to give everyone an A for it. Yeah. Yeah, it was challenging for me at first because, as I said, it is very difficult to grade poetry. They are making a big effort, but what I was grading was their improvement since the very beginning. So if in the first class you have 2 words, it's okay, but then in the other class present 4 and so on, right? So that's what I evaluated at the end, because of course that poetry are your feelings and it's kind of challenging to assess it. Yeah, okay, I'm going to read the comments. Okay, that's right. And it was all. I want to tell you that I am pretty glad to be here and that it was great to share with you. Thank you so much. Gracias. Merci. Obrigado. And
Okay,
I hope you
thank
have a
you
nice day.
very much, Laura, for your presentation and for answering all the audience questions. Now we are going to move on to a short break, and we will get back here at 17:10